The reason you shouldn't be listening alone, if you're listening to this alone right now, I should probably tell you something before I start. There was a moment in one of these stories where everything still felt normal, and I almost got up to check something. I remember sitting there, thinking it would take maybe 5 seconds, just a quick look to put my mind at ease. I didn't do it. And for a long time, I told myself that was the smart decision. That whatever I thought I noticed wasn't real, or at least not worth confirming. But the truth is, I still think about that moment more than anything else that happened. Not what I saw, not what I heard, just the fact that I chose not to find out. That's the part that stays with you. All three of these happened at different times, in completely different places, and none of them felt dangerous at first. They all started the same way most normal nights do, quiet, predictable, nothing out of the ordinary. But in each one, there was a point where something shifted. Not in a dramatic way. Nothing obvious. Just a small detail that didn't quite make sense. And every time, I noticed it and then ignored it. That's the only reason I'm telling you this now. Because once you hear it, you might start noticing those moments too. Story one, the late night knock that didn't make sense the first time it happened. I was at home by myself. It wasn't unusual. I'd spent plenty of nights alone in the house, and nothing about that evening felt any different at the start. It was quiet in the way normal nights are quiet. Not completely silent, just the kind of background stillness you don't really notice unless you stop and think about it. The hum of something electrical in another room. The occasional car passing somewhere far off. The kind of small familiar noises that make a place feel lived in. I remember I was sitting on the couch, not really paying attention to anything in particular. My phone was in my hand, some video playing quietly, the kind you half watch while your mind drifts somewhere else. Everything felt routine. That's why the knock stood out so much. It wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive or rushed. Just a simple, single knock on the front door. At first, I thought I imagined it. It didn't interrupt anything. It didn't come with footsteps or a voice or anything that made it feel urgent. It was just there. One sound that didn't belong. I paused whatever I was watching and sat still for a second, listening. Nothing. No second knock. No movement outside. No one calling out or trying again. That alone felt strange. If someone needed something, they usually knocked more than once, or at least waited long enough to make it clear they expected an answer. This didn't feel like that. I checked the time on my phone. It was later than I expected. Not early evening, not a normal time for someone to stop by unannounced. The kind of hour where most people are already inside, settled in, not knocking on doors unless there's a reason. I stayed where I was for a moment, trying to make sense of it. Part of me thought it could have been a neighbor, maybe someone needing help with something small, or maybe I'd misheard it entirely, and it was just some random noise that happened to sound like a knock. That explanation felt easier. Still, I got up, not quickly, not urgently, just enough to walk toward the front of the house and look through the small gap in the curtain beside the door. I didn't turn any lights off or try to hide the fact that I was inside. I wasn't thinking like that yet. I just looked, and I didn't see anyone. The porch light was on, casting that dull yellow glow over the front step and part of the walkway. It wasn't bright enough to see everything clearly, but it was enough that if someone had been standing right there, I would have noticed. There was nothing. No one waiting, no movement, no shadow stepping away. Just an empty space where someone should have been. I stood there a little longer than I needed to, staring out like something might suddenly appear if I gave it enough time, but nothing did. That's when it started to feel off, not in a dramatic way. Not enough to scare me outright. Just enough that I couldn't fully relax again. Because if someone knocked, they had to have been there. And if they were there, they should have still been nearby. Unless they left immediately, which didn't make sense either. I thought about opening the door. Just stepping outside, looking around, confirming that no one was there, and putting it behind me. It would have taken a few seconds. But something about the silence on the other side of the door made me hesitate. It wasn't the kind of silence you forget about. It felt heavier than that. Like it was waiting for something. I stayed where I was, hand resting near the handle for a moment, thinking it through. Then, I stepped back instead, and I told myself it wasn't worth it. Someone who didn't act normal, I went back to the couch, but I didn't sit the same way. The video was still paused on my phone, the screen dimming slowly in my hand, but I wasn't really thinking about it anymore. I kept listening. At first, I told myself it was over. Whatever that knock had been, it was probably nothing. A mistake. Someone at the wrong house. Something simple that didn't need a second thought, but I didn't press play again. I just sat there, waiting without meaning to wait. After a minute or two, the silence started to feel louder than before. Like it wasn't just the absence of sound, but something I was actively aware of now. That's when I decided to check again. This time, I moved slower. Not because I was scared exactly, but because something about this situation felt like it deserved more attention than I'd given it the first time. I walked back toward the front door, stopping just before the curtain. I stood there for a second, listening again, like I expected something to give itself away if I stayed still long enough. Nothing did. Then I pulled the curtain back, just slightly. At first, it looked the same as before. The porch light casting that dull glow, the empty step, the quiet street beyond. But then I noticed movement. It was subtle. Easy to miss if I hadn't been focused on it. A figure, already a few steps away from the door, moving toward the edge of the light. I couldn't see them clearly. Just the outline of a person, partly caught in the dim light, partly fading into shadow. What stood out wasn't that they were there. It was how they were moving. Slow, not casually walking away. Not in a hurry either. Just slow, steady movement, like they weren't concerned about being seen or not seen. And the strangest part was I couldn't hear anything. No footsteps on the path. No sound of gravel shifting. Nothing that matched the movement I was watching. It didn't make sense. I leaned a little closer to the curtain, trying to focus, trying to see more than just the outline. But as they moved farther away, the light faded off them completely. And then they were gone. No turn, no clear direction. Just gone into the dark beyond the porch light. I stayed there, still holding the curtain slightly open, waiting for some kind of follow-up. Maybe the sound would catch up. Maybe I'd hear a gate open or a car door or something that explained where they went. But there was nothing. Just that same heavy quiet. For a second, I thought about opening the door and calling out. Just asking if they needed something or if they'd knocked by mistake. It would have been a normal thing to do. But the thought didn't sit right. I don't know how to explain it exactly. It wasn't fear, not in the way people usually describe it. It was more like hesitation that didn't feel optional. Like something in me had already decided it was a bad idea before I could fully think it through. So I didn't call out. I let the curtain fall back into place and stood there, listening again. That's when it happened. Another knock. This time, it wasn't at the front door. It came from the back of the house. Clear. Distinct. The same kind of knock as before, single. Controlled. Not aggressive. But it was behind me. For a second, I didn't move at all. My brain tried to process it logically. Tried to fill in the gap between what I had just seen and what I had just heard. But there wasn't anything that made sense. There hadn't been any sound of someone running along the side of the house. No footsteps passing the windows. No indication that anyone had moved from the front to the back that quickly. It was just another knock. In a place that didn't connect to the first one. I felt it more than I reacted to it. That quiet shift where your body realizes something before your mind does. I didn't go toward the back door. I didn't say anything. I just stood there, completely still, listening for whatever came next. But nothing did. No second knock, no movement, no sound at all. Just silence again. And somehow it felt heavier than before. Like whatever had made that noise didn't need to try again. Like it already knew I was there. What I almost did, I stayed exactly where I was for a while after that second knock. Like moving too soon would somehow make things worse. Nothing else happened. No third knock. No footsteps. No sound at all from the back of the house. Eventually, I forced myself to move again, but not toward the back door. I didn't even look in that direction. I just stepped away from the front, back into the living room, like creating distance from both sides of the house at once would make me feel better. It didn't. I kept thinking about the front door, about how close I was to opening it. At the time, It felt like a small decision, just curiosity, just wanting to confirm there's nothing there. But the longer I sat with it, the more that moment started to feel heavier than everything that came after. Because if I had opened the door, I don't know what I would have seen. And that's the part that still sticks with me, not knowing whether someone was trying to get inside or already checking if they could. That thought didn't come to me right away. It built slowly the longer I replayed it, the way the knock didn't repeat, the way the person moved away without sound, the way the second knock came from somewhere that didn't connect to the first. It didn't feel random anymore. It felt deliberate, like something testing the space. I didn't sleep that night. I turned off everything that made noise, my phone, the TV, anything that could cover up even the smallest sound. I sat there in the dark, listening to every shift in the house like it meant something. Every small creak felt amplified. Every faint noise made me pause and focus harder, trying to decide if it was normal or something I should pay attention to. The problem was everything sounded almost normal. That's what made it worse. There was never anything clear enough to react to. Nothing I could point at and say, that's what it was. Just enough to keep me awake. Just enough to make me think something might still be there, somewhere outside. Or maybe just out of sight. By the time morning came, everything looked exactly the same. The front step was empty. The back of the house looked untouched. No footprints. No signs anyone had been there at all. If I hadn't been awake to hear it, I could have convinced myself it never happened. But I did hear it, 2 knocks. In 2 different places, and nothing in between to explain how that made sense. I stopped trying to explain it after that. But I didn't forget it either. Because that wasn't the only time something felt wrong like that. Story 2. The empty road where I wasn't alone. The next time something like that happened, I wasn't at home. I was driving. It was later than I usually stayed out, but not unusual enough to feel risky. The kind of night where the roads are mostly empty and everything feels quieter than it does during the day. I remember the drive being completely normal at first. The road stretched out ahead of me, long and uninterrupted, with only the occasional streetlight breaking up the darkness. My music was playing low, not loud enough to drown everything out, just enough to fill the silence. It was the kind of drive where your mind drifts. You stop thinking about where you are and just follow the road without really paying attention to each turn or mile. That's how it started. Nothing felt off. No tension, no reason to be alert, just a quiet road and a routine drive home. I don't know exactly when I first noticed the car behind me. It wasn't sudden, it was just there. At some point, I glanced in the rearview mirror, the same way you do without thinking, and saw headlights in the distance. Not close, not far. Just another car on the road. I didn't think anything of it. On a road like that, it wasn't strange to see another vehicle every now and then. Even late at night, there were always a few people heading somewhere. So I looked away and kept driving. But after a while, I checked again. The car was still there, same distance. That's what I noticed first. Usually, when you're driving on an empty road, the distance between you and another car changes without you realizing it. Someone speeds up, someone slows down, someone turns off somewhere along the way. But this car wasn't doing any of that. It was just staying there. I told myself it didn't mean anything. Maybe they were just driving at the same speed. Maybe they had somewhere to be and didn't want to overtake for whatever reason. There were plenty of explanations that made sense if I didn't think too much about it. So I didn't. I focused on the road ahead again, letting the music fill the space in my head. A few minutes passed, then I checked again. Still there. Same distance. Not closer. Not farther. Just exactly where it had been before. That's when I became aware of it, not in a panicked way. Just enough that I couldn't completely ignore it anymore. I adjusted my grip on the steering wheel slightly, almost without realizing it, and kept my eyes on the road a little longer than before. Then I checked again. Still there. At that point, it stopped feeling like a coincidence. Not because anything had happened, but because nothing had changed. That was the part that didn't sit right. I started noticing small things after that. How long the road had gone without any turns. How there were no other cars coming from the opposite direction. How the only headlights I could see were the ones behind me. I told myself it was just my mind focusing on it too much. That if I stopped checking, it would go back to being just another car on the road. So I tried not to look. I kept my eyes forward, focusing on the lines on the road, the rhythm of the drive, the sound of the engine. But after a while, I couldn't help it. I checked again, and it was still there. The car that followed too perfectly at that point, I tried to convince myself I was overthinking it. It's easy to do that when nothing is actually happening. No sudden movements, no aggressive driving, nothing that clearly crosses the line into something you can call a problem. Just a car behind you, staying there. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling. So I decided to test it, not in a dramatic way, just something small. I eased my foot off the gas a little, letting my speed drop by a few miles without braking. It was subtle enough that most people wouldn't even notice right away. I watched the road ahead for a few seconds, then I checked the mirror. The car was still there. Same distance. It had slowed down too. That was the first moment it felt deliberate. I told myself it didn't mean anything. Maybe they noticed without thinking and adjusted automatically. People do that all the time. But once the thought was there, I couldn't ignore it. So I did the opposite. I pressed the gas slightly, bringing my speed back up a little faster than before. Not enough to stand out, just enough to see what would happen. A few seconds passed. Then I checked again. The headlights stayed exactly where they had been. No gap forming, no closing distance, just matched. I felt something shift in the back of my mind then. Not panic, not yet. Just the quiet realization that whatever this was, it wasn't random anymore. I kept driving for another minute, trying to act normal, even though I was paying attention to every small detail now. The road was still empty. No side streets, no passing cars, nothing to break the pattern. Then I saw an upcoming turn. It wasn't a major one, just a smaller road branching off to the right. The kind of turn you could take without much thought, but not one you choose unless you actually needed to go that way. I hesitated for a second. Then I took it. No signal at first. I turned it on at the last moment, slowing just enough to make the turn clean without drawing attention to it. As soon as I straightened out on the new road, I checked the mirror. For a second, there was nothing. Then the headlights appeared again, turning onto the same road behind me. Same distance, no rush, no hesitation, just following. That was the moment it stopped feeling like a coincidence entirely. But even then, nothing about it was aggressive. No high beams, no sudden acceleration, no attempt to get closer or force a reaction. If anything, that made it worse. Because there was no clear reason to react. If they had sped up or driven erratically, I would have known how to respond. But this was just presence. Consistent, controlled, and quiet. I started trying to see the driver. At first, I thought maybe I just hadn't looked closely enough before. So I adjusted my mirror slightly, trying to catch more than just the headlights. But the light worked against me. All I could see clearly were those 2 points of brightness, fixed in place, with everything behind them blending into darkness. Every now and then, I thought I caught a shape, a silhouette where the driver should be. But it never stayed clear long enough to confirm anything. It was like looking at something that refused to come into focus. I considered pulling over. The thought came up suddenly, like a quick solution. Just stop, let them pass, and remove the uncertainty completely. It would have been simple, but something about that idea didn't feel right either, because if they were just another driver, pulling over wouldn't matter. They'd pass, and it would be over. But if they weren't, then stopping might be the one thing I shouldn't do. That thought lingered longer than I expected, so I kept driving, trying to act normal, trying not to make it obvious that I was paying attention. But every few seconds, I checked the mirror again, and every time, the result was the same. Same distance, same position, same quiet, controlled presence behind me. At some point, I stopped trying to explain it, because no explanation fit perfectly anymore. And the worst part was, nothing had actually happened. The moment I could have found out after a while, I started looking for anything that would break the pattern. Not because I had a plan, but because I needed something to change. Even a small interruption would have been enough to make it feel normal again. That's when I saw the gas station. It was up ahead on the right side of the road, sitting just off the highway with a few lights on. Not bright, not busy, but open. The kind of place you barely notice during the day, but focus on completely when everything else is dark. I felt a shift the moment I saw it. It was an option, a way to end whatever this was without actually confronting it directly. Just pull in, stop for a minute, let the other car pass, and reset everything back to normal. I slowed down slightly as I got closer, not enough to be obvious, just enough to give myself time to think. The entrance came into view. I could turn in. I could stop. I could finally see if they kept going or if they followed. That thought stayed in my head longer than anything else had up to that point, because this was the moment where I could actually find out, not guess, not assume, not keep checking the mirror over and over again. Just know. I glanced at the rearview mirror again. The headlights were still there, same distance, waiting, in the same quiet way they had been the entire time. I eased off the gas a little more, my car naturally drifting closer to the entrance. For a second, I even moved slightly toward the right side of the road, like I was already committing to the turn. And that's when something in me stopped, not a loud reaction, not fear in the way you'd expect. Just that same quiet hesitation I'd felt before, the kind that doesn't feel like a choice. I remember thinking very clearly that if I turned in, I wouldn't be able to undo it. Whatever happened next would be something I'd have to deal with, and I didn't know if I wanted to know that badly. So I kept going. I passed the entrance without turning, letting the gas station fall behind me like it had never been an option at all. For a few seconds, I didn't check the mirror. I just focused on the road ahead, trying to settle the feeling that I had just missed something important. Then I looked. The car was still there. Same place. Same distance. Like nothing had changed. I drove for a few more minutes after that, not really thinking about anything else. Just the road, the silence, and the steady presence behind me. Then, without warning, it was gone. I didn't see it turn. I didn't see the headlights drift away or fade into the distance. One moment it was there, and the next, the road behind me was completely empty. I checked again, adjusting the mirror slightly, just to make sure I wasn't missing something. But there was nothing. No lights, no movement, no sign that the car had ever been there at all. I kept driving, slower now, watching the mirror more carefully than before, waiting for it to come back into view. It didn't, and the only thought I had left was the one I couldn't get rid of. If I had pulled into that gas station, I might have finally understood what was happening. Or I might have made a mistake I wouldn't be able to take back. Story 3. The night I was sure someone was inside the last time it happened, I wasn't at home and I wasn't driving. I was staying somewhere unfamiliar. It was a friend's place I had agreed to watch for a few days while they were out of town. I had been there before, but never alone and never overnight. Still, nothing about it felt uncomfortable at first. It was just a different space. The kind you notice more when you're by yourself, but not in a way that feels threatening, just small differences. The layout, the way the light switches were placed, the sounds the house made settling at night. When I first got there, everything felt normal. I went through the usual routine, checked the doors, made sure everything was locked, turned on a few lights so the place didn't feel too empty. I even walked through the rooms once, more out of habit than concern, just to get a sense of the space again. Nothing stood out. Everything was exactly how it should have been. That's what made it easier to relax. I settled into the living room, put something on in the background, and let the time pass the same way it usually does at night. Quiet, uneventful, nothing worth remembering. At some point, I turned everything off and got ready to sleep. The house got noticeably quieter after that. Not just because the TV was off, but because the space felt different without anything filling it. The kind of quiet that makes every small movement feel more noticeable. I didn't think much of it at first. I lay down, letting my mind drift, almost asleep. That's when I heard the first sound. It came from somewhere deeper in the house. Not loud. Not sharp. Just a small noise. Like something shifting slightly in another room. I opened my eyes, listening. For a second, I told myself it was nothing. Houses make sounds all the time, especially at night. Wood settling, temperature changes, small things you don't notice during the day. That explanation made sense. So I stayed where I was. But I didn't fall back asleep. I kept listening. After a few moments, the silence returned. but it didn't feel the same as before. It felt more focused, like I was waiting for something to interrupt it again. I sat up, not fully alert, just enough to pay attention. Nothing else happened. Eventually, I got up. Not because I was sure something was wrong, but because I didn't like the feeling of not knowing. I walked slowly through the hallway, keeping the lights off at first, letting my eyes adjust to the darkness. Everything looked normal, the same as it had earlier. I moved into the next room, then another, just doing a quick check without thinking too much about it. That's when I noticed something small. One of the doors wasn't the way I remembered it. It wasn't wide open or fully closed, just slightly different. A few inches off from where I was sure I had left it. I stood there for a second, trying to recall exactly how it had been before. And the more I thought about it, the less certain I felt. Maybe I hadn't paid attention earlier. Maybe it had always been like that. It wasn't enough to prove anything. But it was enough to make me pause. I adjusted the door slightly, just enough to match what I thought was right, and stepped back. Then I listened again. The house was completely quiet, no movement, no follow-up sound. Nothing to confirm that what I heard earlier meant anything at all. But the feeling didn't go away. It just settled in. Not strong enough to panic, just enough to make everything feel slightly off. The silence that confirmed everything after that, I stopped moving the way I normally would. Without really deciding to, I started being quieter, more careful. Every step felt deliberate. I didn't turn the lights on right away. I let the darkness stay the way it was, like changing it too. Suddenly would reveal something I wasn't ready to see. Instead, I stood there for a moment, listening again. Nothing. Not even the small, natural sounds I'd been telling myself were normal before. No creaks, no settling, nothing shifting in the walls. Just complete silence. And that was the first time it felt wrong in a way I couldn't ignore. Because a house like that shouldn't be completely silent. There should have been something, even the faintest background noise. But there wasn't. I took another step forward, slower this time, placing my foot carefully so it wouldn't make any unnecessary sound. I wasn't trying to sneak exactly, but I also wasn't trying to announce that I was there anymore. That thought came without me meaning it to. Like somewhere along the way, the situation had shifted from checking the house to not wanting anything else to know where I was. I moved down the hallway again, passing the same doors I had just checked. But this time I paid more attention to everything, the way the air felt, the shape of the shadows along the walls, the small details that hadn't mattered before. I expected to hear something again, another small noise, something that would confirm I wasn't imagining it. But the longer I listened, the more I realized there was nothing at all. Not the kind of silence you ignore, the kind that feels controlled, like it's being kept that way on purpose. That thought didn't come fully formed. It built slowly, piece by piece, as I stood there trying to make sense of it. If someone was inside, I should have heard something. Even if they were trying to be quiet, a shift in weight, a breath, a mistake, something. But there was nothing, and somehow that felt worse. Because it didn't feel like absence anymore, it felt like restraint, like whatever might have been there wasn't making noise. Not because it couldn't, but because it didn't need to. I stopped walking completely after that. Just stood there in the middle of the hallway, trying to decide what to do next. That's when I noticed the door at the end. It hadn't stood out before. Just another room, nothing special about it. But now I couldn't stop looking at it. It felt wrong, not visibly, not in a way I could, like someone asked. Just a quiet certainty that if anything in the house was different, it was behind that door. I stared at it for a long time. Long enough that I started thinking about opening it. Not just thinking about it casually, but actually preparing myself to do it. I took a step closer, then another. Each one slower than the last. My hand even started to lift slightly, like I was already reaching for the handle before I fully decided to. Because this was the moment where everything could be confirmed, just like before, just like every other time. All I had to do was open the door. And whatever was causing that feeling would finally make sense. Or it wouldn't. That was the part that stopped me. The same hesitation I had felt before. Quiet. Immediate. Like something in me already knew the answer. And didn't want to prove it. I stood there, close enough to reach the handle, and didn't move any further. The silence didn't change. It stayed exactly the same, waiting, or maybe just not reacting at all. After a few seconds, I lowered my hand, then I stepped back, and I left the door exactly the way it was. The thing I never opened, I stayed there for a few seconds after stepping back, still facing the door like I might change my mind. Nothing about it had changed. It looked exactly the same as it had before. Closed, quiet, just a door. But the feeling didn't go away. If anything, it got stronger the longer I stood there without doing anything. Like the moment was still waiting for me to decide what to do. And by not acting, I was only delaying it. I remember thinking how easy it would be. Just one step forward, one movement. Turn the handle, push it open, and whatever was on the other side would finally make sense. I wouldn't have to guess anymore. I wouldn't have to stand there in the hallway trying to convince myself nothing was wrong. I could just know. That thought stayed in my head longer than it should have, long enough that I almost did it. My hand lifted again, just slightly this time, hovering in the space between me and the door, and then I stopped. Not suddenly. Not out of panic. It's that same quiet resistance I had felt before. The kind that doesn't feel like fear at first, is certainty that something about this is a bad idea. I lowered my hand again, took another step back, then another, and instead of opening the door, I turned around and walked away. I didn't check any other rooms. I didn't go back through the house. I went straight into the bedroom, closed the door behind me, and locked it. The sound of the lock clicking into place felt louder than anything else had that night. I stood there for a second, listening, waiting for some kind of reaction. Nothing came. No movement, no sound, no indication that anything on the other side of that hallway had noticed what I had just done. I didn't turn the lights off after that. I stayed in that room, sitting on the edge of the bed, listening to the same silence that had followed me there. Every few minutes, I thought I heard something. A shift, a faint sound from somewhere in the house. But every time I focused on it, it disappeared, like it was never really there to begin with. I stayed awake until morning, didn't check the door again, didn't leave the room, just waited for the light to come through the window, for something to change that made it feel safe to move again. When it finally did, everything looked normal. The hallway was empty. The door at the end was still closed, exactly the way I had left it. I stood there for a while, looking at it in the daylight, trying to find anything that would confirm what I had felt the night before. But there was nothing, no sign that anything had been there. No proof that I had been right to hesitate. And still, it didn't feel like I was wrong.